He told millions of people how to face chaos. He built his entire life on the idea that meaning is forged through suffering, that responsibility is the antidote to despair, and that the only way to confront the darkness of the world is to look straight into it and refuse to blink. And then, quietly, he vanished. Jordan Peterson, clinical psychologist, Harvard professor, the man who sold 10 million copies of a book telling ordinary people how to stand up straight and face the worst that life could throw at them. Have you ever had the very thing you built your life around turn against you? Leave a comment below, because that question is at the center of everything that happened to Jordan Peterson. And before this video ends, you'll understand exactly why. In May 2026, Tammy Peterson, his wife of 37 years, gave an interview to the New York Post. She did not soften it. "His mornings are brutally painful and discouraging for him," she said. Later, much later in the day, he sometimes feels some relief. She said her husband feels as if he's in another realm of pain. She said there were no plans to return to work. The man who once filled 1,000-seat theaters across 4 continents now wakes up every morning to suffering so intense his wife can only call it another realm. But this story does not begin in that bedroom in Paradise Valley, Arizona. It begins in a small frost-covered town in the far northwest corner of Canada, where a quiet boy sat in a library and started asking questions the world wasn't ready for. To understand how the man who wrote the rules for carrying suffering ended up unable to carry his own, you need to understand who Jordan Peterson was before the world knew his name. Jordan Burnt Peterson was born on June 12, 1962, in Edmonton, Alberta, but Edmonton was just the hospital. He grew up in Fairview, a small, weathered town of a few thousand people in the province's far northwest, where winters come early and last long enough to teach you that endurance is not optional. His father, Walter, was a schoolteacher of Norwegian ancestry. His mother, Beverly, was a librarian at the local college campus. They were not wealthy. They were not connected. But in the house of a future intellectual, they gave him something rarer. They were present, and they valued learning. The librarian at his school, a woman named Sandy Notley, whose daughter Rachel would later become Premier of Alberta, introduced the teenage Peterson to books that most adults never read at all. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, George Orwell, Aldous Huxley. These were not comfort reads. These were writers who stared directly into the machinery of totalitarianism and human suffering and refused to look away. Jordan Peterson, barely a teenager in a frozen prairie town, read them all. And something in those pages unsettled him in a way that never fully resolved, a question he would spend his entire life trying to answer. Why do human beings choose ideology over truth? Why do they build systems that end in catastrophe and call it progress? What makes a person capable of genuine evil? He joined the New Democratic Party at 13. He quit at 18. Not out of cynicism, out of a hunger for something the political answers couldn't reach. The questions kept pointing somewhere darker, somewhere psychological, somewhere he would spend the next 40 years exploring. That darkness would become his life's work, and eventually, its cost. He studied political science at Grande Prairie Regional College, then transferred to the University of Alberta, a degree in political science in 1982, a second degree in psychology in 1984. Then Montreal, then McGill University, where he earned his PhD in clinical psychology in 1991 under Robert O. Pehill, one of the world's leading researchers in addiction and aggression. His doctoral thesis examined the psychological markers that predisposed people to alcoholism. He wasn't collecting credentials. He was building, piece by piece, a framework for understanding why people destroy themselves and whether that destruction could be stopped. Have you ever walked away from the safe path because something inside you demanded more, demanded to go deeper, even when deeper meant darker? Drop it in the comments. Because that is exactly what Peterson kept doing at every fork in the road. By 1993, Harvard had called. For 5 years, he lived in Arlington, Massachusetts, teaching and researching at one of the most prestigious universities on earth. His students remembered him not as a professor, but as someone who made them feel that ideas had consequences, that how you understood the world determined how you would live in it. In 1998, he returned to Canada and joined the faculty of the University of Toronto. He was seeing approximately 20 patients a week. He was building lectures on mythology and meaning that would eventually become something the world had never quite seen before. He just didn't know yet how loudly it would all explode. On September 27, 2016, Peterson sat in his home office at the University of Toronto, pointed a camera at himself, and uploaded a YouTube video. It was titled "Professor Against Political Correctness." In it, he announced he would refuse to use government-mandated gender-neutral pronouns, calling Canada's Bill C-16 compelled speech, the first step toward the kind of ideological enforcement he had spent decades studying. The university threatened him. Student activists confronted him on campus. Faculty unions condemned him. Journalists declared him dangerous. Within a month, those videos had 400,000 views. Within a year, his Patreon income had grown from $1,000 a month to more than $60,000. Letters arrived from across the world, from young men especially, but from people of every background, saying some version of the same thing. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way." He did not back down. Not from the university, not from the press, not from the organized protests that greeted him on campus. He had studied authoritarian systems for 40 years. He stood at the center of the storm with a calmness that his supporters found heroic and his critics found infuriating in equal measure. But here's the part nobody was watching. The cost of that calmness was already accumulating somewhere the cameras couldn't reach. In January 2018, Penguin Random House published 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos. By August of that year, 7 months in, it had sold 2 million copies. By 2023, 10 million worldwide, translated into 45 languages. He sold out the 1,000-seat Emmanuel Center in London, the 2,000-seat Orpheum Theatre in Los Angeles. His world tour reached more than 200,000 people across 45 cities. His Channel 4 interview with journalist Kathy Newman accumulated 49 million YouTube views. His Patreon income reached $80,000 a month. The New York Times called him the most influential public intellectual in the Western world. And underneath all of it, underneath the sold-out theaters and the viral interviews and the millions of letters from people whose lives had been changed by his ideas, there was something no tour schedule could account for. A body that was beginning, without announcement, to send signals it could not keep up. And a family fighting a war that had nothing to do with pronouns or ideology. And no one in the audience knew. In 2019, the same year Peterson's fame was reaching its absolute peak, Tammy Peterson was diagnosed with Bellini duct carcinoma, a rare and aggressive form of kidney cancer. Rare not in the gentle sense of uncommon, but in the clinical sense of poorly understood, difficult to treat, and statistically unforgiving. Physicians did not offer much room for optimism. Jordan Peterson was carrying his global fame in one hand and his family's survival in the other, quietly. The way people carry the heaviest things, without telling anyone, because the telling makes it real. Have you ever carried something so heavy that you couldn't share it with anyone, because saying it out loud would make it undeniable? Leave a comment below. Because that is exactly the weight Peterson was walking into every lecture, every interview, every sold-out theater. Also in 2019, there was the medication. In 2016, a physician had prescribed clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, used for anxiety. The dose was low. Then in 2019, as Tammy's diagnosis arrived like a verdict, the dose increased. And something in his body responded in a way nobody initially understood. Benzodiazepine dependence does not announce itself like a dramatic breaking point. It creeps. It rewires. It takes the brain's capacity to regulate fear and calm and quietly dismantles it, so that the anxiety the medication was meant to suppress returns not at its original intensity, but amplified. A cruelty built into the pharmacology itself. He tried to stop, multiple times. What followed was a period he has described only in fragments, a darkness so total that the man who spent his career analyzing suffering from a clinical distance was now submerged in it without any distance at all. And this same cruelty, in a different form, would find him again. By late 2019, his family made a decision that generated headlines around the world. They flew him to Moscow. North American physicians, his family said, were unwilling to provide the treatment they believed he needed, a medically induced coma to stabilize his nervous system without the brutal conscious experience of withdrawal. When Russian doctors examined him upon arrival, they found something worse, pneumonia in both lungs. The coma went ahead anyway. For 8 days, Jordan Peterson was unconscious in a Moscow hospital. Then, 4 weeks in intensive care. He lost significant motor function. He could not walk normally. He could not type. The man who had debated the most combative interviewers in the world with the stillness of someone entirely at home in conflict now struggled with the basic physical grammar of movement. He was moved to Serbia for rehabilitation. For months, his absence spoke louder than any lecture he had ever given. He reappeared in June 2020, thinner, careful, a fragility he had never shown before. "He's smiling again for the first time in months," Michaela wrote. "His sense of humor is back." And by late 2020, the world exhaled. The worst was over. Or so it seemed. From 2021, Peterson re-emerged deliberately. He published Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life. He resigned from the University of Toronto. He joined the Daily Wire as a podcaster and launched the Peterson Academy, an online education platform offering more than 70 courses with Michaela as CEO. He relocated to Paradise Valley, Arizona. To the world, it looked like expansion. A man who had survived catastrophe and come back stronger, more free, more productive than before. But the next chapter was already forming, not in any lecture hall or studio, but in a house full of grief and dust and invisible spores that his immune system had no reserves left to fight. In the summer of 2025, Peterson was helping clean out his father-in-law's house following a death in the family. A task so ordinary it barely warrants description. The kind of thing people do without thinking, without precaution, without any sense that the room they are moving through might be the most dangerous place they have entered in years. The house had mold, not the visible, dramatic kind. The invisible kind. The kind that works quietly through water-damaged walls, releasing biotoxins so fine they cannot be seen, and so persistent they cannot be washed away. Chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS, is what happens when the immune system, triggered by biotoxin exposure, loses the ability to turn itself off. It stops fighting a specific threat and starts attacking the body itself, igniting inflammation across multiple organ systems, relentlessly, without an off switch. Think about what that means. The very system designed to protect you becomes the thing destroying you. Have you ever had a strength turn into the threat, a defense become the source of the damage? Leave a comment, because that is precisely what CIRS did to Jordan Peterson's body. Peterson's immune system had already been through a war. Russia, Serbia, the benzodiazepine crisis, years of dietary restriction. Tammy's cancer. The relentless schedule of a man who had never fully allowed his body the recovery it had been requesting for years. It had nothing left in reserve. Within weeks, the inflammation escalated into pneumonia. Pneumonia in a body already overwhelmed progressed into sepsis, a race between treatment and death. He was rushed into intensive care, where he would remain for nearly a month. During most of September 2025, Jordan Peterson could not communicate with his own family. The man who had an answer for everything had no answer for this. By October 2025, he was out of the ICU, but still hospitalized, diagnosed now with critical illness polyneuropathy, nerve damage that develops after weeks in intensive care. By December 2025, he was finally discharged. 5 months in medical facilities total. He went home to Paradise Valley. And the recovery that followed was not the recovery the world hoped for. Because the damage did not stop when the infection stopped. The neurological injury from years of psychiatric medication, suppressed, managed, believed to be behind him, resurfaced. By April 2026, Michaela confirmed her father was suffering from tardive akathisia, a chronic movement disorder. Intense restlessness, a compulsive need to move, a condition she described as the worst thing I have ever seen anyone go through. Tammy had been there through all of it. The terminal cancer diagnosis that turned out not to be terminal. The Moscow coma. The months in Serbia. The relocation to Arizona. The sepsis. 35 years. As of May 2026, Jordan Peterson is at home in Paradise Valley with family and, as Tammy described it, helpful companions. In her New York Post interview, the most detailed public account of his condition yet, Tammy said he feels as if he's in another realm of pain. She said his mornings are brutally painful and discouraging. That only much later in the day does he sometimes feel some relief. She said there are no plans to return to work. The damage done from psych medications from over 6 years ago, she told the Post, takes patience, time and loving attention. The Peterson Academy continues. More than 70 courses. Michaela running it with the same intensity her father once brought to everything he touched. He watches them sometimes, quietly, from home. His daughter says he likes them. There is something almost unbearably human about that image. A man who spent his life building a cathedral of ideas, sitting in its pew for the first time, finally still enough to look up at what he made. Jordan Peterson is living out the argument he spent 30 years making. Not from a stage. Not into a microphone. in a bedroom in Arizona, on a morning that is brutally painful and discouraging, with only the quiet presence of people who love him to mark the difference between 1 hour and the next. The rules he gave the world were not wrong. They were real, and they worked, and millions of people built better lives because of them. But rules are not armor, and meaning is not medicine. And even the most disciplined, most purposeful, most intellectually courageous life cannot negotiate with a body that has finally, quietly, reached its limit. His story reveals something about the cost of carrying truth at the scale he carried it, not abstractly, but physically. It accumulates in the nervous system, in the immune system, in the years of pushing past what the body kept asking him to hear. And it reveals something that no book could have taught as clearly as this life has, that the gap between what we preach and what we live is not a failure of character. It is the most human thing there is. What do you do when the tools that carried you your entire life are no longer enough? When the philosophy stops working? Tell us in the comments, because it is a question every single person watching this will face before their life is over. If something in this story reflected something in your own, leave a like. It costs nothing. Subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. And leave a comment with this: what is the one thing from Jordan Peterson's life, not from his books, but from the life itself, that you will carry with you? Because the greatest lesson he ever taught may not be in any of his 12 rules. It may be this one, written not in words, but in everything that happened after them. Keep going, even when the rules are not enough. Especially then,